All right, guys, thanks for joining Ausjdocs podcast. Let's talk about GP training and being a GP. Our guest, Alex, is a fellow GP and have been practicing for a few years. He will be sharing about his journey and experiences as a GP. We also ask some questions about the problems that GPs face today. So let's do it. All right, guys. All right, thanks for coming back. Hello, everyone. So we
What
are joined by
up?
Alex,
Hello.
who is a GP at the
Hey,
moment, fellow
Alex.
GP. Hey, Alex. And we
Hey.
have Andy here as well. Hello, Andy. Andy.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Andy, mate. How was work? You just finished, right?
Yeah, I was busy, man.
Yeah, dude. Being a GP, huh? Quite difficult. And Alex, where are you now, mate? I heard you've been traveling
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah. Currently, I'm on leave at the moment in Auckland, New Zealand.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But
Um,
yeah, yeah. Good to be here.
Yeah, good on you, mate. Yeah, we've been trying to get you on. Obviously, you're a good person. You're a GP. You have plethora of knowledge. So we wanted to make sure we can share that with the listener as well. Alex, mate.
Yeah.
Tell me about yourself, mate. So we always just go from the start. So,
Yeah. Sure.
um,
So yeah, just to the listeners, I've been working as a GP for what is it? About 4 years already.
oh
First few
yeah,
years as a registrar, and then the last 1.5 years as a completed fellow.
yeah, perfect. And Alex, were you at the same uni as Andy, or were you at the same cohort as Andy?
Yeah. Yeah. We're in the same cohort, so same year.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice, nice. And it sounds like you kind of already made up your mind after I guess, graduation that you wanted to be a GP. Because you kind of
Oh,
went
not
straight on
quite
to GP, right?
actually.
Oh, yeah.
Not
What happened?
quite. I would say that most people probably didn't know for sure what exactly they wanted to. I think a lot of people were like me. So I think when I was doing internship, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. Just
Mm.
doing various hospital rotations, trying things out. And then only in the sort of near the end of my second year as a JHO that I decided I want to go down the GP pathway.
Gotcha. And what kind of, is there like a certain point at that time that made you decide to become a GP or get into a GP training program? Or was there anything kind of sparked at the time?
Hmm. I reckon for everyone, it's just part of the experiences they get, eh? So different people gravitate towards different types of specialties in terms of their
Mm,
personalities and interests. And of
mm,
course, the experience they get when they're going through the trainings themselves matter a lot. So if they had good GP experiences when they were doing those rotations as a medical student,
hmm
they would naturally gravitate a little bit more towards that type of specialty. Yeah.
mm. And did you have that GP experience yourself as a medical student? Did they
Yeah.
provide that for you?
Yeah, I did. So as a medical student, I had a pretty good GP term actually. So I guess that definitely contributed towards going down this pathway.
What did you like about it? What did you like really like about the GP training, or even just being a GP?
Yeah, so I would say probably in terms of why I chose to be a GP.
Hmm.
Um well, there's a couple of factors. Number one, you need to be a people person.
Hmm.
So definitely, if you're the sort of person that likes to have that interactions with patients, you want to build up that patient-doctor relationship, watch families grow, then GP is
Hmm.
a good specialty for that. Whereas a lot of other
Hmm.
specialties, you don't get exposed to that.
Yeah.
The long-term continuity of care again. Again, a
Hmm.
lot of specialists they may see their patients, once every few months, but only as a GP do you see them so regularly and become a
Hmm.
bit more involved in their lives.
Hmm.
And then just in terms of the scope of practice, I quite like I guess, the broad diversity of topics that you would experience in the GP setting. So you're not restricted to just one specialty, where you end up just knowing that subject, but not much of everything else. Perhaps not in depth of it. Feels like almost like a jack of all trades, pretty useful in most settings. So I like
Hmm.
that about GP.
Yeah. So it's a primary care basically. You kind of need to know. really everything, literally.
Yeah, that's right.
About because you don't know what's gonna come in the door next. You don't know
Could
the
be
next.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And I
Alex,
think
I'm wondering. So I
Mm.
guess you decided to go and into GP training at the end of your second year out of medical school, but like when did you become interested in that? Like, were you interested in it
Mm,
right from the beginning, or
I would say I started thinking about it at the start of the second year. And then during that year, I chose rotations that were more relevant towards GP and at the same time got feedback from other people who are already on the GP program
right?
to find out what their lifestyle is like and then decide if that was suitable for me. And then when I decided it was, then I proceeded towards that.
So you
mm,
had friends who were already pursuing GP training or a career as a GP,
Yeah,
and that's how you
so
kind of.
that's right, colleagues who might be 1 or 2 years above myself.
And
mm.
what did they mention about life as or
Hmm.
working as GP that attracted you towards it?
Well, at the time, I think it's much the same sort of things. I think most of us who go into the GP sort of pathway have, I guess, pretty similar sort of um, like styles of medicine practice that they want to pursue. So yeah, much the same things I talked about just before.
Like
And,
as in work-life balance or
Oh, work-life balance falls into it as well. So it is quite flexible. So for example, if someone wants to start a new young family, as a GP, because technically you're doing your own private practice, right?
yeah.
You can dictate your own hours. So part-time, for example. But at the moment, I'm working full-time, so um, flexible hours so like the hours are still pretty long for me.
mm,
Certainly if someone who needs that work-life balance can have that in the GP pathway.
Alex, I just wanted to ask this question because,
Mm,
like from my perspective, when I see people getting into GP training, I
mm.
see kind of two kind of school of thoughts. So where, like you mentioned that some people find GP training interesting or like the work-life balance and like the benefits or the advantages of being a GP or GP trainee. But on the other hand, like other side, the some people get disappointed by the hospital system or the
Oh
experience in the
yeah.
hospital system. So I'm just wondering, was there anything that kind of, I guess, on the other side where there was a bit of a disappointment that kind of made
Mm.
you lean towards GP?
I wouldn't say particularly for myself, but like you
Mm,
said, certainly I have heard of others who are like that. The training pathways for things like certain specialties such as surgery can be very tough. It's hard to have any sort of your own life until you get through that training. But there are other specialties within the hospital where you can have that work-life balance as well. So I mean it's not necessarily um it's not 100% black or
mm.
white in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's always going to be a bit of a gray area. But I mean, because I heard so many stories where some people use GP training or being a GP as a kind of something to fall back on. So say, for
Mm,
example, like you said, if the surgical training doesn't work out, you couldn't get into a surgical training, people kind of tends to, oh, GP is pretty easy to get in, and you just get in there. But it's a different different way. Like it's very different. GP in itself is very difficult in a different way, right?
mm,
Because you're dealing with a lot of, like you said, a lot of things, a lot of like different presentations, and also people. Um,
mm.
and you kind of sometimes you get those kind of people fatigue, I guess it's called, because
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
seeing a
you
lot of
do.
you're using a lot of your emotions and your energy, right, towards these
Yeah,
patients as
you
well.
do.
Mm,
So I think a lot of the people, some of the people who used it just go into the GP as a, I guess, backup option.
mm,
Sometimes they don't necessarily realize that. And whether that's really sustainable is a question. So, for example, if someone was always keen on surgery, never got
mm,
in, and then used GP as a fallback option, it's a very different type of lifestyle and scope of practice. And is that something they would really want to do for life? If it's not something they like, that
Mm,
yeah, because you do
mm,
really need to be a people person and deal with a lot of more sort of the social sort of issues that arise with your clients and patients, which may not be something they were as aware of.
exactly. And I think you just have to you just need to be aware of it. Yeah, I think it's okay to say yes. I'm gonna try GP training to see where that can go. But you kind of have some sort of I guess knowledge of what's it involved, right? Obviously it's gonna be very
Yeah,
different to a
yeah,
surgical training. Um,
yeah. You've got
but
to, I guess,
mm,
temper the expectations and
yeah.
I guess realize what you're getting into.
Yeah, exactly. Hey mate, just FYI, just during our conversation, I'm gonna ask a bit of like listeners' questions.
Yeah, yeah, by all
Clear?
means.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So people do ask about GP training. So someone asked,
Yeah.
if you get accepted onto a training program, can you start in PGY2? Do any of the rotations completed in the intern year count towards training? So can you just talk us through about the GP training and when to get on and what you need to do?
Yeah, so the GP training you can get onto pretty quickly. You can even apply for GP training straight off, but you do need to at least finish an extra year in the hospital before you're able to start doing the sort of training in the actual GP clinics in the community.
During
Well,
the
you
internship?
can you can apply during internship,
Okay.
but you'll need to, if I remember correctly, and Andy, correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong. I
Mm,
believe you still need to at least do a JHO year before you can actually start working in the GP
correct.
clinics. Yeah,
So
yeah.
okay.
you can apply for GP training in your postgraduate year one,
Hmm.
but you won't be able to start it until you've completed your internship successfully and gotten general registration, I believe. And you can count your postgraduate year two or JHO year as
Mm,
your first year in GP training, which is the quickest you can complete it is 3 years in total. One
mm-hmm.
year, the 1 year, usually the first year is done in the hospital setting.
Hmm.
And as part of that, you also need to complete at least a term in pediatrics, I believe.
Yeah. So pediatrics was probably the only absolute requirement. I think they also, I can't remember, but I believe they also needed to see that you had a broad experience in other rotations itself, but not necessarily specific ones. Pediatric is the
Mm,
only one that specifically they need you to have had experience in.
mm. And pediatric is the one actually sometimes get quite difficult to get a rotation on as well, because there's a lot of people who wants to
Because
do
not all
pediatrics.
hospitals have pediatrics. Yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes you can, I guess, you can do like an emergency term where there's a bit of a pediatric. Is that right? And you can count that towards your GP training.
If it's a hospital that has a pediatric emergency department attached to it,
Mm,
so I know certainly a couple of hospitals in Brisbane, which is where I'm mostly at, has that. But
okay.
if it's just a mixed ED, I'm not sure
Mm.
that counts. I think it has to be a specific pediatric ED.
Yeah, I think either it has to be a like pediatric emergency, or if there's a mix, then you need to have a logbook to
Yeah,
count. Like there's a certain number of pediatric cases you need to see. And
yeah.
I think there's another option. I think you're aware that there's like a pediatric diploma or some sort of like study that you can
There
do.
is
Yeah,
diploma in peds. Yeah.
yeah, and that's another option, isn't it? You can do that to kind of cover
Yeah,
all
I
the
believe so. It's not the way I did it, but I do believe
mm,
so.
yeah. So I think
I'm not sure about that diploma thing. I think in order to do that diploma, you probably will have to clock enough time doing pediatrics anyway. So
mm,
yeah, at the end of the day, you will still need to have a bit of
Yeah.
time,
mm,
either in pediatric hospital or pediatric department
mm-hmm,
or pediatric emergency department, or you can do if say for example if you're in a smaller hospital and you work 6 months in a mixed emergency department,
yep.
and if you can prove that say 20% of your caseload of patients that you see pediatric patients, then I think that will count towards a minimum to fulfill that criteria.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm talking about in terms of logbook. So you gotta keep a logbook, make sure that you're getting like 20% of pediatrics cases or something, right? So that's what it is.
See, I didn't realize that because I actually got to do a pediatric rotation, but
Oh, did you go to like
I think
right, yeah.
I think it's always better to do a dedicated pediatrics term, anyways, just to get that.
Yeah, if you have the chance,
Pediatrics is quite different to adult medicine. You know what I mean?
I believe, Alex, so just in terms of the entrance exam, why that there is like a SJT or situation judgment test,
There is, yeah, I
and
remember that.
and there's an interview, I believe. Is that right? Are those two things that you need to get through?
Oh, it's so long ago. I need to try and
That's right.
really
Andy
remember
can
that.
help.
It definitely was the situational judgment exam. I
Mm.
don't recall an interview though.
There is an interview yet.
Andy, okay, it's too long ago for me.
No, yeah, it's already been 4 years, mate. Yeah.
So I think you do the so you put in your application, and then once they accept your application, you have to sit through this MCQ, which is the situational judgment
test.
Yeah,
test.
that test.
And then based on the result of that test, you get ranked based on your performance into bands, which is like top band or second band, third band or fourth band, something like that. And that decides where you can preference your training provider.
Which areas of the state that you can go to basically or train into. So it could
That's
be
right. So a lot of people prefer to train in the metropolitan areas. And so people who score higher on the SJT gets a higher sort of preference, I believe. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
So I think when you get ranked, and for the listeners, we are talking about the Queensland, I guess, the GP training. So all the different states got a different kind of, I guess, a little bit different, I guess, but they're very similar, but different way of doing it. But I think in Queensland, if you get higher ranked on the SJT, you kind of get to choose more of a inner metro areas, right? Is that right, guys?
Yeah,
that sounds about right. Yes,
definitely within Queensland it is. Yeah.
And once you're done with that, so you got to do an interview, I believe.
Yeah, the interview is more. I think it's a fairly straightforward. And I think it's my belief is that everyone who is at an acceptable level gets through, and I think it's just to weed out the really unsuitable candidates, I believe.
Yeah, like I honestly don't even remember the interview. I just remember the situational judgment test. I'm pretty sure most people who got an acceptable band in the situational judgment test probably didn't have any issues with the interview. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so when you're actually getting that interview or having that interview, is that with the GP clinic itself, or is it an interview with the state, I guess, GP training organization?
I believe it's an interview to get onto AGPT, which is the Australian General Practice Training.
Yeah. So
by that point,
program.
By this point, you haven't started actually talking to individual clinics yet. You're still getting onto training.
That's a separate interview,
provider.
JP. That's a separate interview. That's a job interview.
Gotcha.
The interview I'm talking about is interview to get onto the AGPT training.
Yeah, position. Exactly. So there's actually there's reality. There's two interviews. So basically, one SJT, you get a training pathway interview. Once you're all done with that, then you're pretty much in. But you're kind of interviewing. It's like a job. You need to go and do a job interview on each clinic.
Well, you missed a step in between actually. So once you get accepted onto a GP program, you then actually get drafted into what region provider you're going to be for your training. Now
Right.
that's actually changing in the next year. So
Mm,
so when I did my training, this is what happened. Depending on what region, say within Queensland, you're doing your training, they have their own individual training providers that's being recognized by RACGP to provide that training. So
hmm.
Central Queensland, for example, would be GPTQ.
Okay.
Whereas if you were in Mackay or something, it would be a different provider.
Hmm.
But they're all recognized by the RACGP, having provided resources and accreditation to do their training. And
Gotcha.
so you work with the training provider in the following few years as a registrar.
Mm,
They provide the education, I guess keep your progress up to date, let you know what you need to do, provide feedback things so that you fulfill all the requirements under the RACGP training pathway to then complete that RACGP training.
mm,
But in the next, so in 2023, that is actually changing. So RACGP has decided that they're not going to be using individual independent training providers anymore. Instead, they're going to be unifying it all. So RACGP itself is going to be providing the training for the entire region, for example.
right.
I don't know what that change is going to be quite like yet, but
Mm,
that's what's happening.
okay, that's interesting, isn't it? They're kind of unifying the whole kind of program
Yeah, yeah. So
in a
I
sense.
mean, it's a big change, and they're still going through the teething process. We'll see how it goes, but
Yeah, that'll be
I guess
interesting.
once things are all streamlined, it should provide. The idea is that it provides a I guess a very uniform training experience, no matter which part of Australia you're in.
Okay, yeah, that'll be very interesting.
Mm.
So yeah, so once you get in, so basically, you've done the interview, you've done the SJT, you got the job in a particular clinic. What
Mm.
happens then? What kind of training are you actually getting from there on?
Yeah, yeah. So as we said, once you get onto a training provider, once a training provider accepts you, you then apply for individual clinics in the community.
Hmm.
Basically go for job interviews.
Hmm.
And find one that accepts you that you would like to work there as well. And then you start as a GP registrar.
Hmm.
And that's where you see the junior doctors in GP clinics. Where you do the same sort of job a normal GP would, but
Hmm.
but for example, you might start off by being quite a lot slower. Most
Hmm.
GPs registrars probably start with half an hour appointments,
Hmm.
with breaks in between where you talk to your supervisor so that they provide you feedback. Sometimes your supervisor might sit in with you.
Hmm.
Every week there will be dedicated sessions where you your supervisor sets aside time so that you two have a chat. There
Hmm.
might be an educational topic, that sort of thing. And then
Hmm.
once a week, your training provider would have a teaching session. So teaching session for you as well as other GP registrars in that region. So you
Hmm.
all sit down together to learn a topic.
Hmm.
How much direct supervision did you feel you had as a first year GP registrar
So
working in the GP clinic?
yeah, that supervision actually it varies a lot depending on who you actually get as a supervisor.
Hmm.
So some supervisors might be happy to let you do your own thing. Some supervisors might be a little bit more careful, want to watch you closely for the your initial setting in phase, make sure everything's going smoothly before letting you
So
run
did you sit in with your
yourself.
supervisor, or your supervisor sat in with you seeing
So my
patients?
one, yeah, my supervisor for my first year was actually pretty content on letting me run things by myself at the start. Part of that though was because I did an extra year in the hospital, so I actually finished my senior health officer year, SHO, before I went into
Oh,
GP.
right. Okay.
So compared to
So
other
you've
GP
done 3 years in
in the hospital,
hospital as
yeah,
a junior
yeah.
doctor
Before going
before
into GP
doing
land.
G.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
right.
Gotcha.
So I had a little bit more experience. So they were fairly happy to let me run my own things, and yeah, there wasn't much problem.
Did that so that extra year? did they did that count towards your, I guess, the training? Because some,
Um,
you know how you can shorten it sometimes?
no, it didn't.
Or
It
you
So
was
didn't?
just extra.
you can only count 1 year in hospital training as
Okay.
part of your uh, time for the total GP training. So the 2 years have to be done in a GP setting. So say you done 5 years in hospital training like I did.
Hmm.
I can only count 1 year into GP training.
So
If that makes
internship
sense.
is a must, so that doesn't count, right? So internship is a
Internship
must.
doesn't count. Does not
Yeah.
count.
And then you just do another extra that will count, which if is,
Yeah,
more than PGY two or
JHO.
three. Yeah,
So the
JHR.
early, so the earliest you can start in the community GP clinic as a registrar is when you're in PGY 3. I started my PGY 4, so I did an extra year in the hospital just to get some extra experience.
All right, so we're currently joined by Alex and Andy and myself, and we've been talking about GP training pathway. Alex, I was saying, there's a lot of interest, or there are a lot of questions about GP training that we
Hmm.
have received, and some of them are actually from doctor from UK. So it seems like,
Okay.
yeah, UK doctors who wish to come to Australia to work, and maybe they're also thinking about, GP training and things. So we're just going to continue on and talk about the GP training itself as well. But so this gentleman, or this listener asked us, he initially said, would I able to ask how GP training works in Australia? Do you move around for it, or are you based in one region? Um,
Hmm.
is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as a specialist interest in Australia? And where can that specialist interest go? For example, if someone had a special interest in a gastro, would they do endoscopies, etc.? So it sounds like someone international, right? So
Hmm.
they're not from Australia. Um, yeah, can you just talk us through with that as well? But we did kind
Yeah.
of talk about the region thing, didn't we already? Because you kind of talked about.
Well, we haven't quite answered that question yet, so I'll try to answer each of those queries one by one then. So first of all, you said, are you based in just one region or do you move around? Generally, generally you would just stay at your own region, so with the training provider that you've got onto already. Um, Now, during that time, it doesn't mean that you're at the same GP clinic though. So during that time, um, even if you're in band one of your initial acceptance into the GP training pathway, you still have to do at least one what's called outer metro year. So one year of your 2 years in the GP clinic has to be in an outer metro area. Now, outer metro is actually not very far, so you could be just within 35 minutes drive from the city, for example, and that would be like an outer metro. So it's not too bad. Um, but yes, so those 2 years have to be in two different GP clinics. You can't be just at the same clinic for the 2 years.
Okay, so Alex, just for the listeners, the GP term, are they broken down into like 6 months or like year? GPT one is 6 months, isn't it? Like GPT two is 6 months.
Oh yes, yes, you're right. It is. So GPT-1, GPT-2, all the way up to GPT-4, essentially.
Right.
But generally, you can do 6 monthly terms at different clinics, but most people do GPT-1 and 2 at one clinic, and then 3
Gotcha.
and 4 at different. So essentially,
Right.
they kind of like it's almost like 1 year terms.
Right. And yeah,
Yeah.
like, as you said, the outer metro term, it needs to be 1 year, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, for Queensland at least, right?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay, gotcha.
And but normally you would do it within those both of those years, at least within that same provider's region. However,
Mm,
I have heard of some people who move to completely different regions, for example, going from Brisbane to Sydney halfway during their training.
mm,
It does mean that they need to shift from one training provider to another. And that process may be a little bit more convoluted.
mm.
I haven't tried it myself before, so I'm not too sure what that process is like, but I would imagine
I
it
imagine you'll have to apply for special
Consideration.
considerations, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah. I imagine they wouldn't let you do it quite often or anything because, obviously there are other people who failed and
It's
got in
a
and
it's
things
a
like
it's
that
a
as well.
rare thing. I've only heard of very few people who've done that, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that interesting nevertheless. Yeah.
Mm. And what was the second question on the list?
So yeah, other question was, so is there such a yeah, is there such a thing as a special interest in Australia GP training? Oh, there is, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
certainly, certainly. So once you've completed your GP training, when you become a fellow, you can sort of gear your own practice style towards what you're interested in.
Mm,
Special interest itself is not it's not a qualification per se. So, for example, if you were someone who just does a lot of skin procedures and then one day you decided you only wanted to see skin, then you can basically just say you're a GP with a special interest in, skin cancers, that sort of thing.
mm-hmm,
Um, female GP, for example, who does a lot of women's health, may decide to, if she does some extra training and other things like merino insertions, that sort of thing, they may
mm,
just want to call themselves a doctor with a special interest in women's health, for example.
mm,
So a lot of GPs with special interests are like that. There
mm,
are some more specific special cases though. So for example, there are GPs who does cosmetic things. So
mm,
a lot of cosmetic clinics you see around Australia are not
mm,
necessarily plastic surgeons.
mm-hmm,
Some of them are just GPs with special interest in cosmetic procedures, and they do things like Botox injections, that sort of thing.
mm.
Um, there's even I think there's
There's
even
even
GP.
GPs who do vasectomies and things like
I was
that, I
going to
think.
say, yeah,
Yeah.
vasectomies and like circumcisions, that sort of thing. No, not quite something I've touched on, but yeah, that's certainly there are people who do that.
Mm,
There is a limit to how much you can say you do a special interest in, though. You can't say so you can't do things that are outside your qualifications per se. So for example, you can't just go and do a colonoscopy on someone and say you've got a special interest in that because you do need to actually have the general surgical or gastroenterological qualification to be able to legally do that. But the more minor sort of procedures you can proceed with
Like you can't do brain
slowly.
surgery, obviously. You can't do
Yeah,
knee
yeah.
replacements, that
You
sort of
can't
thing,
do
if
you
you're
can't
not
do
trained in that area.
that's right, that's right. You can't do whatever you want, but there are a lot of things that can be explored still.
no, but yeah, I was gonna say, I was actually gonna touch on that because like so you need to stay on within your scope of practice, right? So you need to be
Hmm.
comfortable of what what you're comfortable with and what your what your experience you has been, right? But
Yeah.
seems like some of them are kind of overreaching that boundary, but like and I guess some like the other GPs obviously who has special interest go do a further study, get a further certificate, and whatever
Hmm.
have you. Even with that what they call the aesthetic medicine, I guess. They do have a
Hmm.
bit of a courses, don't they, to do like Botox injections and what have you.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I even saw a GP who does, like you said, scopes as well. Like it's
Oh, you
like what
have?
yeah,
Okay.
when you go into a rural area, there are actual GPs who does um gastroscope, C-scope, and sometimes they do light anesthesia as well. And they, like, mind you, these guys are not ACRM, right? These guys are like old
Hmm.
school GPs. And one I even saw doing a C-section as well, which I was very
Oh.
surprised. Yeah, so
Well,
these,
there you go. There you go. I wasn't aware of that.
but I'm just
Interesting.
wondering whether, I mean, like you said, they must have some sort of qualification to be able to do that, though, right? I mean,
I
they're not
think
just winging it.
rural regions might be a bit of an exception.
Mm,
So if you're in a very rural part of Queensland, for example, you mentioned C-section before. If
mm,
someone was pregnant, they're at imminent risk of the child and mother dying. You're the only doctor within the, I don't know
mm.
I don't know how rural this is, but
Yeah, sure.
you, you may have been trained up to be able to do that sort of thing, perhaps. But certainly within like a city setting,
Yeah.
a GP trying to do a C-section within Brisbane City, would you'd be massively
Yeah, that's
overstepping your scope of practice. Yeah.
exactly. And mind you, without saying where that is and how rural that is, it's a hospital where they do have a bit of like surgeons and gynae and obstetrics in there. But he like this. this person had a list of his own, and then he does rounds and stuff as well, which was very interesting to see.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, there is a possibility to, I guess, go out and get some qualification if you want to, especially that
Mm,
rurality. Obviously you can't do that in metro areas, but if there's areas
mm.
in need, I think you can kind of steal
Oh,
your
that's
way
right,
that
that's
way.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
And generally, if you wanted to call yourself a GP with a special interest in something, you would pursue some extra training in that area. So you might
And
do an extra,
qualification, yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
diploma of like some
I
extra
suspect this,
diploma or
yeah.
skincare
I suspect
course, that
this
sort of
GP
thing.
who practiced in this area, which is, obstetrics and gynecology, would have had some form of recognition from the College of Obstetrics
like
and gynecology.
Ranscog is called. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
Yeah,
and
they
he
might have
would
done
have
like
had,
some sort of
yeah,
diploma, even though it's not a
that's right,
full-on
yeah.
gynecological specialist training, but some extra experience in it.
Just the other thing to think about is, of course, can you get your medical indemnity provider to accept and cover you for those things that you're doing. And if you're doing things that are outside of your scope of practice, I can guarantee you they would not insure it. So you're on
Yeah,
your
yeah.
own, basically.
And yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, imagine how much they pay for their indemnity to do those things, right? It'll be
Yeah,
massive,
and
Mm.
and
I
and some
reckon.
and some doctors decide that it's just not worth it paying
Exactly.
for the insurance premiums, and they're just doing it. It's just, I'll just
Yeah, yeah,
stick to what I'm able
yeah,
to do, kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting. Um, Alex, so we was talking about obviously the training pathway, and there's some component where you have to spend out of metro areas for about a year or so. There is a component where you can actually do what's called AMS, right? So that's something that you can also do as part of the GP training, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So what do you say it was again? What was
AMS,
it?
the Aboriginal medical, what are they called? Clinics. You know how
Oh
like
yeah,
you can do a term on the Aboriginal clinics?
that's right, that's right. I didn't personally do a term there, so I'm not sure there's too much experience I can tell you about that. Um, but certainly I've got colleagues of mine who have done that instead. And essentially in those clinics, it's quite different from what a usual GP clinic is like.
Mm,
So it's not necessarily like a normal clinic where patients book privately. You've got, private 15 minutes consults.
hmm
Um, a lot of it, a lot of it, well, there is certainly going to be a walk-in component, but there's a lot of sort of extended time sessions spent with patients. So their standard consults are usually longer than a normal GP private GP clinics consult sessions.
mm,
The GPs themselves in those clinic are usually paid by an hourly rate rather than by their Medicare billings.
gotcha.
And I do believe that's because their funding is going to be different as well. Their funding is not going to be just via the normal Medicare billings. I do
Mm,
believe they do have other extra government Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health clinic funding.
And they are those clinics are quite like most of them are rural, isn't it? So if you want to go
Oh
to
That's
no
not
that,
true.
that's
We have
that's
them
that yeah.
in the city
oh, you
areas
do?
too.
Oh, right,
Yeah, that's
okay, yeah,
right.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, for
So,
example, in within Brisbane, one of the major ones is in Wollongabba, for example.
oh, dude, that's not rural at all. That's in the
No, no,
city.
no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
okay,
And
right, right.
that's
Oh,
because
okay.
yeah, that's because there's a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community even just within sort of Brisbane's city centre as well.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
The other thing that's different is it's a more of a multidisciplinary team approach. So you're not really practicing as an individual doctor or practitioner, and you have your own patients. It's more like they're all patients of the Aboriginal Health Clinic,
The clinic,
and
that's right.
so you will use a lot of your colleagues as resources. Like, oh, I'm gonna send you to talk to our diabetic educator, to our Aboriginal health liaison, to to our chronic health nurse, and so on and so forth. And it'll be much easier as well to link them up to the public hospital for specialist opinion. For example, someone who's diabetic can, they'll be quite easily linked up to the renal clinic at the hospital, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And Andy, have you ever thought about doing that at all?
Yeah, I have. But it's a challenging job for sure. There's a lot of social issues, obviously, associated with the patient population. Even though you get paid, a lot more, but it comes with a lot more complexity as well.
I'm surprised that you said that, because it sounds like something that you probably don't want to do, Andy.
I think at some point you consider it, because it's interesting, and you see a lot of different pathologies that you wouldn't normally see.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be very different pathologies, different diseases and conditions.
What I would say is that at this point in our careers, so Andy and mine, I would say most of us just coming sort of in the first few years of coming out, we've only just started becoming full GPs. We're probably not too ready to be I guess to be almost having going into that type of special interest field. At the moment, myself personally, I want to stay more as a general GP, at least for the next few years, so a generalist. And then I think at that stage, most people would be like that as well. Once they've been a general sort of generalist GP for a while, then they decide what sort of special interest they want to be, and then Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health may be one pathway, for example, and then they may choose to do that as their special interest, and they then join up with one of those clinics sort of long term.
Having said that, if you're absolutely interested in Aboriginal health, you can certainly do your training. Like, you can do a year of training in an Aboriginal health clinic as part of your registrar year. So it's certainly an option if that's what you're absolutely passionate and interested about.
Would that be part of those extra years? Like, what are they called? That you guys have like extra year to do whatever you
No,
want.
you can count it as your
You can count it as one of your core training years. Yeah.
Your core training years. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, but what about that little bit where you can actually go back to your hospital to do gynae stuff, and if you want to?
So what you're referring to, you know how we were talking about how it was broken at GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3,
Yes.
etc. So GPT-4, which is your last 6 months of training, essentially is that. So its other name is I think
extended skills training is
yes,
what they call it.
Yeah, extended skills
because
training.
by that point, by that point, a lot of people will quite a lot of people anyway may have done the exams and finished already. They just need to finish that time, and so they may choose to use the last 6 months to pursue a special interest or go back to the hospital. At least when I was in my training provider, though, they didn't particularly encourage that. They still preferred for you to try and get that maximum sort of community GP experience rather than going back into hospital. And I think a lot of training providers would recommend, if you wanted to pursue a special interest, do that after you've completed your entire GP training first. Yeah.
So you do an extra year instead of doing it in the 3 years that's allocated to you. Having said that, I don't know how many people would actually postpone their fellowship in order to do an extra year for excellent skills training.
No. What I'm saying is that a lot of training providers are saying that you can finish your entire GP training first, and then you can choose to do some hospital work as a as a GP fellow, because there are available positions to in a lot of specialties to hire GPs essentially to help out, and then you can get your special interest experience that way rather than using your time during your GP training itself.
Right.
Does that sort of make sense?
That's like you are a consultant and you're going back as a reg, isn't it? Potentially.
Well, it's different. So, for example, a lot of emergency departments, sometimes the doctors who run the emergency departments aren't necessarily emergency department
Oh, yeah,
physicians.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's another
Sometimes
thing. Yeah, yeah.
they're GPs. Yeah, yeah,
GPs, yeah, yeah. No, we talked about standards, didn't we? So GPs running the floor,
yeah.
yeah, of the
And it's not
emergency
just
department.
that. It's not just that. There are other specialties such as palliative care. Sometimes they might have a register. Well, someone who does like a registered job, but is actually a GP who's there to get the special experience, interest experience. Or sometimes there are other specialty clinics, outpatient clinics, which a GP with a special interest in that field runs.
Mm,
Um, yeah.
okay. Hey, yeah, okay. Let's move on. So let's talk about the fellowship exam. So when can you actually sit the fellowship exam, and what are the fellowship exams?
Yeah. So after your first year of your community GP experience, you can sit the exams.
Mm,
And there's a couple of components to the exams, two written and then one OSCEs, although that's changed in recent years slightly. The written is still the same. So the two written exams are let me just think. So abbreviations are AKT and KFP.
mm-hmm,
What they stood so AKT was applied knowledge test and
mm,
KFP was
Key
what was
problem feature.
oh yeah, yeah.
Key feature problem.
Oh,
Whatever.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. So the
mm,
AKT it's basically like it's kind of like multi-choice, but instead of just one, if I remember correctly, instead of one right answer, multiple answers could be correct. You had to um tick all the valid options, and it's not just say four choices, it might be, eight
It could be
choices.
A to J or something like that, which is like
That's right, that's
ridiculous.
right.
Yeah.
And then the KFP is like I guess it's kind of like a short answer questions.
sorry, I was just gonna say I always heard about problem with KFP. Like, what is wrong with that
Yeah.
exam?
Between the two of them, KFP is the harder one.
Mm,
Um, I guess it just tests well, what's wrong with the exam? Then nothing's wrong with it. It's more just the knowledge
Nothing's wrong with the exam.
the knowledge you need for it is greater than the AKT, for example. And unlike and you need to actually know the answers instead of just picking an answer like the AKT. So some people may find that a little bit more struggle. It's like when it's like when you did high school exams. Short answer questions are often a bit harder than multi choice, for example, as an analogy.
Right, right. And in the KFP, there's negative marking. So if you put two answers in the same line, you get negative marking because that's considered overcoding. So you need to be precise with your answers,
mm,
and you need to provide varied answers and not just
Mm.
similar answers as two different answers. If that makes sense.
Well, sometimes you need to interpret what the examiner is trying to ask for as well. So you want to answer it in a relevant point of view instead of going off track. And that's a little bit of a skill to develop. Um, Usually most people would do some practice questions before actually sitting exams to get a bit of a feel on the style of questions, what when they word the questions, what they're really looking for, that type of thing.
mm,
And I guess some people may struggle on that.
mm. I've heard that that exam is only done in Australia. So even in New Zealand and UK, they actually don't have that kind of type of exam as a fellowship exam. I've heard,
Oh.
and I don't know how to validate that, but obviously, I've heard that.
Well,
But yeah, sounds like a bit.
maybe some of the viewers would be able to tell us.
Yeah, yeah, they do. They comment on it. But I think yeah, it sounds like a very difficult exam. Which exam were most difficult for you, Alex?
Oh,
Can you
which was
remember,
more difficult?
or did you
No,
have some,
I
problem, or have some trouble with
no,
what have you?
I didn't have any particular trouble with either one of them myself. So
Because you're a smart dude.
uh no, I got lucky. But no, I didn't have any trouble with myself. But from some of my colleagues I've seen, people who failed exams, generally
Mm,
it's the KFP that they failed.
KFB. Yeah, yeah. And or what's the last exam? So there's three, right?
Yeah, so once you've done the AKT and KFP, so once you've been able to pass both of them, then you get to do the OSCEs.
Mm,
Well, in the past, they were OSCEs. So there were
mm,
individual stations that you went around to. And then often it's, well, it can be various things, but a common one would be, for example, putting you in a scenario. You're the doctor. This is the case. This is, the blurb. You go in, you see what's happening, and then you describe or show to them what you're going to do, how you manage, how you treat the situation. That's one example. There are
mm,
other stations. There can be stations where they ask you to, explain to a patient a test result, for example. There can be
mm,
empathy stations, so breaking bad news, that sort of thing. And there can be generally there's a journal article appraisal station as well. So they
mm,
give you a journal article and then ask you some questions about interpreting the outcomes of that article, or whether it's a good article or not. So that used to be just so OSCEs face to face. You physically go there, do those stations. After COVID, though, that's changed. So instead of face to face, they do it all online now. They call it something else now, but I can't remember what it's called. Do you
It's called
remember, Andy?
CCE,
CCE? Okay, yeah,
clinical
yeah.
case examination, I think. Um, it's still much the same, except it's delivered over Zoom. That's all. There is some rumors that starting from next year they'll be going back to the in-person, face-to-face sort of OSCE style examination as opposed to delivering it over Zoom.
mm.
But it's a watch this space sort of thing at the
Gotcha.
moment.
Yeah. So you really, because of the whole COVID, it just changed. Sounds like.
Yeah, that's right. Because delivering over Zoom, there are some things that are limitations. So, for example, I talked about for example, there might be a fake patient which you physically examine, but you can't do that over Zoom. Instead, you're just describing to them what
Yeah,
examination you
absolutely.
would do.
Right,
And you
So
right.
it's
don't you
not
don't
not
get you
quite the
don't get
same.
the body language that the the simulated patient would be delivering to you. So it's a bit tricky to do it just on Zoom, if you know what I mean.
Mm,
It's not
mm.
quite
Yeah,
as
yeah,
um true to life, I suppose.
Is
yeah.
that what you did, Andy, for your exam?
That's right. I did it
Yeah.
over Zoom. It's kind of good and bad. It's good because you can do it from the comfort of your own home, as long
Yep.
as you've got a good internet connection and a good set of headphones and
Mm-hmm.
camera.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the downside is, yeah, you don't get that
It doesn't feel real.
you don't get that reality sort of like, oh yes, I know how to do this because I've done this a gazillion times in real life kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you have to do it, yeah, a bit kind
Yeah.
of uh fakely over uh a HD camera, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Hey, Alex. So, how long did it take you to study for all those exams? Like, how does it normally take to study and then
Yeah.
pass?
Well, I usually give it I would suggest for the written exams, you should give yourself at least 6 months. So you want to at least start 6 months before. I mean, realistically, you want to study throughout the whole thing, right? As soon as you're on the GP this program, you should start studying day one. But if you're really not doing it, you're putting it off, then I think you should at least give yourself 6 months.
6 months, yeah, yeah.
And then after, well, pretty much you want to do the OS most people try to do the OSCE straight after. And so it's just flowing from one to the other. There isn't any extra sort of time allocated to the OSCEs itself. You're somewhat preparing for the OSCEs as you're approaching the written as well.
Yeah, I think yeah, all the active exam, all the fellowship exams are going to be pretty hard. Hey, it's always just going to be really hard exams. But is it
Hmm.
doable while you're working as a GP?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Yeah, yeah, certainly. So, I mean, as a when you're a GP registrar, you are working and studying at the same time.
Mm,
Um, you don't your leave is just the amount of leave that you get per year is just the
mm,
same as a normal working doctor. So 4 weeks leave in an entire financial year. Oh, sorry, calendar year.
okay.
I mean, you can save it up and use the 4 weeks just before your exams. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, but what happens if you move into a different clinic? Like, obviously you save it up those leave for that clinic. But what happens if you move to another clinic? Do they get like carried on or no?
No,
Well,
if you
well,
don't use it in the year, you'll kind of
You're forfeiting it.
you're forfeiting it. Yeah,
yeah.
that's it.
Ah, really? That's okay. So do they get
Well,
like
because
paid
part
out?
of with those leave while you're on the training program, I guess there's two sides. One is the agreement with the clinic, so your contract with the clinic to say how much leave you have, and the other part is your in terms of your training provider requirements. So you have to have certain set number of I think hours per week and number of weeks per year while you're in the GP clinic. So you can't take too much holidays, otherwise you don't fulfill your training time requirements.
Thanks for listening in. We hope you've thoroughly enjoyed this episode. You can now listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast. If you want us to keep making great content, please give us a like and subscribe and leave us a comment.